Good evening. Welcome. I'm Debbie Lacy, and I thank you all, those joining us online and here in person. We're going to get started formally in just a few minutes, but just wanted to welcome all of you, and especially to those viewing online. Thank you for your patience. We neglected to tell folks that be a 6:30 start for the actual program time. Folks that got here in person were enjoying a community dinner. So sorry you didn't get that at home, or from wherever you're watching, but hopefully you got some good nourishment at the end of your day and you're ready to hear a good evening of discussion about housing issues here in East King County. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because we are here and all the candidates are here. Is that correct? I'm too short to see over this podium, but I can't believe that's you, right? Okay. All right. Well, welcome. I am Debbie Lacy with Eastside For All, a nonpartisan local nonprofit and one of the co-hosts for this event. Thank you to all the organizations that created this forum as one part of our broader housing work on the East Side. I want to make sure that we can get to the slides for everybody at home and also here online. So I'm going to just switch this over and have Chad get that lined up for us. Thank you, Chad. Chad's with the Housing Development Consortium, one of our partners. Thank you especially to the Lake Washington Institute of Technology for hosting us here. Yay, a big round of applause for them, please. I really, next time I'll bring a step stool. This is awkward. I apologize. I'm not here for very long. I have a very small role here. Thank you to the candidates for accepting our invitation and making the commitment to run for public office. With our focus tonight on housing, homes, I'd like to start by acknowledging the first people who made this area their home. Our region lies on the unceded lands of the many tribes of the Coast Salish-speaking peoples, including the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Snoqualmie, Stillaguamish, and the Suquamish. We honor all who have held relationship with this land and its bounty for generations. Tonight, we're raising issues that are priorities for those most impacted by the lack of affordable housing here in East King County, those who have been displaced, are at risk of being displaced, and the many who wish they could live here to be closer to their jobs but can't. I'll briefly share some data. First, of the 13,000 new housing units needed in Kirkland in the next 20 years, everyone, over half of those are to be affordable units for people with the lowest household incomes. Next slide. The Lake Washington School District has 300 students experiencing homelessness. That's 300. And student enrollment is projected to decrease by over 700 students in the next 10 years. School districts facing this trend cite the lack of affordable housing as a key factor. There are strong racial inequities here. In Kirkland, Black and Latinx people are the most severely cost burdened, meaning they pay over 50% of their income on housing. We are all experiencing the housing crisis, but we aren't experiencing it in the same ways. With that bit of context setting, I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Lynn Juniel. Lynn is the Director of Development at Technology Access Foundation, a Seattle nonprofit focused on creating equitable educational opportunities for students and teachers of color to address race-based disparities. An Eastside resident, she's dedicated to catalyzing change for the greater good through philanthropy. Lynn, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Debbie. I have the exact opposite problem. I'm actually getting a little tall for here, so we'll see if we can make it all work out. Good evening, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm going to briefly share the format for tonight's event, but before I do that, I'd like to recognize that one of our candidates, Ryan James, position 6, cannot be here with us tonight. Out of an abundance of caution, he is staying home as he was exposed to COVID. He sends his regrets and says that he really wishes he could be here tonight. So moving on, here's what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to pose questions to each candidate by position, and I'll alternate who goes first. The questions have been curated by the event organizers based on the issues their communities have prioritized. We ask that candidates stay within the 60 to 90 response time limits for each question. This is not a debate format, so there won't be rebuttals. There will be time for a few audience questions at the end, selected from questions people submitted upon registration and ones written on cards and collected by 7 o'clock. And if you have a card, you may give it to Guillermo in the back in the blue shirt. We also want to welcome those viewing via the live stream. Unfortunately, due to time limits, we're not able to take questions from our live stream viewers, but we do truly thank you for watching. And we invite everyone to share your takeaways from tonight with your friends and families. Okay, candidates, to start, please take 90 seconds to introduce yourself and explain why you're running. And we'll start with candidates for position 2, incumbent Kelly Curtis and Katie Malik, then position 4, incumbent Toby Nixon, then Tim Chizen, and I apologize, I've been trying to work on that. And then position 6, incumbent Amy Falcone, and Ryan, who is not here. So no Ryan, it'll just be Amy. You please start.
Is this on? Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for the organizers for putting this forum together. I am Kelly Curtis, and I am honored to serve on the Kirkland City Council. I am running for election to continue the important work of creating a vibrant future for Kirkland. I ran for council because I have a passion for serving our city. In addition to serving as a council member, I have served as vice chair of the Park Board and as a member of our Housing Strategy Advisory Group. I also have a number of regional appointments. I serve as caucus chair for the Growth Management Planning Council and on the King Conservation District, and I also chair our legislative work group. Like any city in the region, Kirkland is facing change. I worked hard to make decisions and create policy that improves day-to-day lives, looks for the future, and makes Kirkland a welcoming city. 4 years ago, I sat at these forums and I told you what I set out to do in my term. I'm very proud of what we have accomplished. We have built more affordable housing and provided housing security. We implemented sustainability actions, expanded tree canopy, and reduced our greenhouse gas emissions. We expanded our park systems. We built a safety net for community members in crisis, and we began the work of addressing inequities in our city, and we improved community safety. I'm happy to serve you, and I look forward to this evening.
Thank you, Kelly. Katie.
Hi, you can. Hi, I'm Katie Malik, and I am running for position 2 for the Kirkland City Council. I was born and raised on the East Side, and my husband and I bought a house 20 years ago in Kirkland, where we've been raising our girls. And what I would bring to the council is a 20-year history of 20-year career working in healthcare. And it's a dynamic environment to be working in. I've seen a lot of change in healthcare, had to adapt, have to maneuver. I also am used to working with limited resources and required to achieve a lot with those limited resources. Three things I'm really focused on is transparency in government, financial responsibility and accountability, as well as public safety, which is important for those of us living in Kirkland and those who want to live in Kirkland. So, thanks.
Thank you. Toby?
That's right, you guys have.
Just need to press that red button on the bottom, Toby.
That one.
Yeah. Press and hold.
Hello. You gotta start the clock. Is that working? No. I think you still the red one on the bottom.
Hello.
Hey. You would think after 48 years in the computer industry, I'd know how to run technology. Hi, I'm Toby Nixon. I'm seeking election to a 4th term on the City Council. I previously served as a fire commissioner and as a state representative for the 45th district. As I mentioned, I've worked in the computer industry 48 years. My wife, Irene, and I raised 5 children in the Kingsgate neighborhood. I have always run on the same set of principles and priorities. I believe in the principles on which our country was founded and that made it great. Individual liberty, personal responsibility, limited government, free enterprise, and tolerance and civility. My priorities, these might sound kind of like Katie's, but they've always been my priorities, are public safety, fiscal responsibility, and transparency and public engagement. I'm firmly committed to the idea that nobody should ever be surprised by something the city does. And we want to make sure that everyone knows how to engage with the city. And that's a very important priority for me. Thank you.
Hi, my name's John Tim Chizen. I am an attorney, planning commissioner, veteran, and a husband and father of 3. I have been on the Kirkland Planning Commission since 2017 and served as the chair of the Planning Commission and am endorsed by the majority of the Planning Commission. I've worked on virtually every housing and building and residential development project in our city's history over the past 6 years, and been intimately involved with really every one of these decisions. The Planning Commission is consists of 7 people that are volunteers that look at these issues and make recommendations to the City Council. And the largest project we've worked on over the past 6 years has been the Station Area Plan, which is on 85th Street and projected to have the possibility of 20,000 new residents. And when I look at a statistic that says the Lake Washington School District will decrease by 700 people, I have serious questions of whether or not that is accurate. And the only way that's accurate is if the Station Area Plan does not materialize quickly enough. And the only way to solve the housing problem in our city is to attempt to get the Station Area Plan online, not in the next 30 years, but in the next 10 years. And when you have more supply, we'll be able to attack the affordable housing issue. And that's what I'm committed to. Thank you.
Thank you, and Amy.
Great, thank you. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and a big thank you to the organizers. I know it's a lot of work to organize something like this. On a side note, I just want to say how happy I was to see that you were offering childcare here tonight. That's something that's really important and something I'm working on for Kirkland City events as well. It's always exciting to be in a room full of people who care about the same things that you care about, like housing. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm Amy Falcone. I'm a current Kirkland City Council member, and I'm a mom to 3 school-age children in Lake Washington School District. We live up in the Finn Hill neighborhood. And since moving here, I've lived here with my family for about a decade now. I've been really actively involved in volunteering in the community, in my kids' schools, in a variety of capacities. The first way that I got involved in city government was with my kids' school walk and bike route safety. That's what got me really passionate about wanting to engage with local government. Before I was elected to council, I served as a founding member and co-chair of the Kirkland Human Services Commission. I also served on the Finn Hill Neighborhood Alliance Board. And before choosing to be a stay-at-home mom, I was a social science expert for the federal government, and I taught undergraduate statistics. So I love data, and I love our community. And I do this work to make our community an even better place for today and into the future. As a mom, I care so deeply about making sure that the future of our community is truly inclusive, sustainable, and connected, place where everyone belongs and thrives. Thank you. I was very precise there.
Yes, but you are just right on the bell there. And thank you, everyone, for those statements. The passion is evident. The first question tonight is regarding tenant protections, and you'll have 90 seconds to respond. One key aspect of having a vibrant and thriving community is ensuring that residents have housing stability. Tenant protections increase housing stability by providing renters with security and predictability in their housing situations. As can be seen in the slide and your handout, jurisdictions have implemented various types of tenant protections to help improve housing stability. This year, Kirkland passed 2 tenant protections recommended by ARCH, a regional coalition for housing while not passing a third recommendation of capping late fees. Do you support a cap on late fees? And what, if any, additional protections and policies would you support to ensure housing stability? This time we will start with our position 4 candidates, John and Toby, then move to position 6, Amy, and close with position 2, Katie and Kelly. John.
Hello? Hey. So I have represented tenants as an attorney against their landlord, and I have worked with developers as a member of the Planning Commission. I have worked with tenants in situations that were extremely abusive to the tenants and situations where they had almost zero leverage in a situation, a total power dynamic that is very disproportionate. But I also recognize that tenants and developers and landlords have to form some sort of a partnership, or else we will not get new housing online in Kirkland, and people will not rent out their houses, and we will not have greater supply. So I would come at this with a fair perspective. I would cap late fees, but I would analyze the cap on late fees to make sure that we're preventing abusive contracts from happening and tenants from being in a position where they are abused and have no leverage. But I would do it in a manner that views landlords and tenants as partners in a contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Toby?
Thanks very much. Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I'm a strong believer in free enterprise. And I think the government should intervene in the relationships between businesses and customers, landlords and tenants, only when it's necessary, such as to prevent fraud. I don't believe in the government trying to displace or override the workings of the market in determining what the policies should be. And so, as a result of that position, I voted against the tenant protection ordinance and was particularly opposed to the cap on late fees. I believe that that kind of cap doesn't really improve things. What it does is shift the costs of people who are not paying their rent, not doing the right things, onto other tenants. And that results in higher rents for them. I think that Kirkland is in competition with other jurisdictions for investment in housing development. And the more regulations we apply, the less attractive Kirkland will be compared to other places where investors could build housing. And I am not going to be one who works to make the business environment worse for housing development. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy?
Thank you. Well, we all know that market rate rents just are not affordable to many folks in our community. And those earning low to moderate incomes who are able to rent in Kirkland are really, really stretching their budget. And so the tenant protections that we passed in Ordinance 04810 that are highlighted on the slide behind me last year were intended to help with just that, right? That said, it doesn't solve the problem. There's no one solution to this problem. We want to keep folks housed. We want folks to be able to stay in their homes. We want folks to be able to find homes. We need folks from a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds to be able to live here in Kirkland. And protections such as what we passed and such as what other jurisdictions have passed are intended to do just that. I have advocated for some of the other, at the state level, for, in my role on the Eastside Human Services Forum Board, for some of the tenant protections that have been passed in other jurisdictions and not in Kirkland. So I do support us discussing additional tenant protections. I think it's, I do agree with John's thoughts that we need to be really thoughtful about how we move forward with policies such as this. We need to bring all stakeholders to the table as we have these discussions so that we can make really thoughtful discussions. But we know, and you're here tonight because you know that there's a housing affordability crisis, and I'm always open to discussing and considering other measures to keep our neighbors housed. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Katie.
Hi. So before we bought our house, my husband and I were both renters, and for a period of time, we lived in San Francisco. And that was an extraordinary experience trying to get an apartment in San Francisco. And the one that my number one takeaway from that experience is that the more tenant protections you create, the less affordable housing will become. Because as Toby pointed out earlier, it just shifts the cost to others that are already renting. I can tell you, we experienced applying for an apartment, and they were asking for a $10,000 signing deposit to rent, which was outside of the contract, which made it legal for them to do, which obviously we were not able to afford. So I think that some important things to keep in mind are that tenant protections do drive up the costs, and it does start to limit the number of available units that there will be in Kirkland, because landlords just are not going to be willing to take the risk. And also, as Toby pointed out, we are in competition for housing, and what we really need to be doing is limiting the cost of for landlords and for apartment buildings to be built to get that moving along.
We'll close with Kelly.
Thank you. So as Councilmember Nixon said, this was a split vote on the council. It was a very difficult decision for us. What we ended up when we were discussing this is it became the battle of the antidotes. If you do tenant protections, then it's going to increase the housing price. If you don't do tenant protection, people will be unhoused. What I care strongly about is keeping people housed. I did vote in favor of the tenant protections that we passed. I am in favor of cap on late fees. I am in favor of tenants on a fixed income to be able to adjust their rent date. And I am in favor of no social security number provided. The other tenant protections, I am very open to having a conversation about. What I worry about is a ban on abusive deceptive practices, rent increases in a poor condition, and rental registration. Is that a city government role? And if so, how do we fund it? What I truly, truly believe as a legislative work group chair is this is not a citywide issue. You should not have better tenant protections when you live in Redmond than when you live in Kirkland. This is something that the legislation should take up and decide. They should do it with meaningful data, with a database of rental properties, what our medians are, and so forth. I am running out of time, but you can tell I'm passionate about this and more research needs to be done.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Your next question is about funding for affordable housing, and you'll each have 60 seconds. Because financial returns from low income and below market housing development are not high enough to incentivize traditional banking institutions and housing developers to finance and construct housing for households on the lower end of the income spectrum, public funding is needed to address the lack of availability for below market housing. Governments at all levels have many opportunities to collect revenue for affordable housing from a variety of sources, including taxes, levies, and fees. And any local funding raised makes it possible for new developments to be competitive when applying for the state and federal resources needed to fund an affordable community. In today's economy, a single new housing development likely needs to competitively seek 5 or more different types of funding coming from federal, state, regional, local, and/or private sources. Given this reality, what local revenue sources would you support to help finance the production and operations of affordable housing? Please be specific. And we'll start this time with Katie.
So first thing I want to point out is 30% of Kirkland's residents are seniors, and a lot of them are terrified of being priced out of Kirkland. I would not create any additional taxes or fees that would create more of a burden on the residents of Kirkland at this time. I think we need to think about other creative options instead of just, instead of raising taxes. I know that Kirkland is notoriously difficult for permitting, and I think, and having spoken with a few developers, one of the big challenges and drivers of cost of building is the uncertainty of the time it will take for permitting once they've bought land and also getting the facilities built. Whether it's a home, multiplex, or apartments. And I'm running out of time, but I would focus on cutting the costs upfront.
Kelly.
Thank you. So Kirkland currently uses 3 tools for funding affordable housing. We pay into ARCH, which is a regional. With this audience, I feel like I don't have to explain what everything is. I'm going to say READ, I'm going to say MFTE, and I'm just going to hope the rest of you are on board with me. But ARCH is a regional pool of money. So the city of Kirkland pays in an annual fee. We also have inclusionary zoning in Kirkland, and developers have the option of doing in lieu fees, which goes to ARCH. With ARCH, we have funded a number of projects. We will have over 900 affordable housing units coming into Kirkland. I am running out of time. I went too slow talking about, do I get time back? Okay, MFTE and READ. What I will say, as legislative chair, is that we advocated for READ 3 next year, which would be specifically for affordable housing, and that would bring over $6 million to Kirkland in a year. So as chair of the legislative work group, I will continue to work on that.
Thank you. John.
Thank you. With respect to additional resources and revenues that would be used for affordable housing, over the past decade, we have had major international corporations move into Kirkland. And the situation on affordable housing hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. And if we're going to allow and have major corporations taking over huge sections of our city, then I want to see our quality of life and our affordable housing get better, not worse. And the negotiating that the city of Kirkland needs to do needs to get better. And I'll help with that. With regard to ARCH, I think ARCH is a great partner, and they bring a lot of expert leadership to the forefront. But I would not advocate for more property taxes in this specific situation, because I know that we are maxing out a lot of people. And thank you.
Toby.
Thank you. Well, our city council has been advocating for a number of years to fix property taxes in Washington state, which are currently capped at 1% increase in any one jurisdiction. And this was kind of enacted by the legislature just in response to a spiteful Tim Eyman initiative, which was wrong in the first place. We need to get to having our property taxes be able to scale with inflation and population growth just to be able to keep up. So that's number one. Number two, the Google development agreement included millions of dollars which would have gone to housing. It's really unfortunate that Google backed out of that deal, or we would have had, I think it was like $12 million for housing. And so along those lines, I think that we should consider asking the legislature to allow cities to impose housing impact fees, the same way we do with road impact fees, park impact fees, school impact fees, to help with the cost of housing those new employees that they're going to be bringing to Kirkland.
Okay, thank you. And Amy.
Thank you. Well, I serve as the caucus chair of the King County cities outside of Seattle for the King County Affordable Housing Committee. And I won't get too much into the weeds because Debbie already showed the data earlier, but we know that the vast majority of the need of affordable housing and just of housing in the city of Kirkland is under 50% AMI, and over half of the housing units we need is in the 0 to 30% AMI. We also know that that level of affordability is not going to be addressed by the market. That's not going to happen. We need other funding sources, which is why I really appreciate this question. We need federal funding, we need state funding, And as Lynn mentioned, with some local funding that helps us be more competitive for that funding. So that's really important that we do that. I am open to having a discussion on any and everything that will help us solve this. I think we can do more with fee in lieu for housing development. I am open to talking about the housing impact fees that were discussed. Open to discussing a housing levy and all kinds of funding sources. What we know is that we're not doing enough now and that we need more. Thank you.
Thank you. Impressive work all, getting all of that information into 60 seconds. We're moving on next to the homelessness response. And you will have another 60 seconds to respond. Kirkland has committed resources to a continuum of care for people experiencing homelessness. However, many believe these resources don't fully address the deep need on the East Side experienced by a growing number of individuals and families. Do you support additional investments in resources for people who are unhoused? Please be specific in your answer about what investments you support. Toby, you are first.
Thank you very much. Well, many of you know I serve as the Vice President of Attain Housing, which is a nonprofit transitional housing provider based here in Kirkland. And Attain has great aspirations for expanding what we're able to do. And that's one area where I would have the city invest more, is working with Attain Housing, Sophia Way, and HopeLink and other organizations, and Imagine Housing too, Tasnim sitting right here, to enable them to expand their facilities and leverage the resources that they have. But the single most important thing that we need to do is take the opportunities to buy land when it's available. And the city's been doing that with Houghton Village, with the Houghton Park and Ride. We're looking at churches perhaps that have excess property, and to be able to help them to develop that property. If we can solve the problem of the price of land, then we can help solve the availability of housing.
John.
Thank you. I would support additional investment in housing the unhoused. There has been a lot of controversy over the La Quinta Inn here in Kirkland. And the major thing I think we can do is be more inclusive and not think of people as unhoused, but have places for them within apartment complexes that are normal apartment complexes, and have perhaps a set aside at deeper levels of affordability. And having set asides at deeper levels of affordability is likely to create less homeless people. We have a homeless problem because we have a affordability crisis in housing. They're interconnected problems, and they're not just people that we need to solve their problem. We need to solve the housing problem so we can reduce homelessness as well, and include them in in normal apartment buildings, and not exclude them into a motel at the corner of our city. Thank you.
Amy.
Thank you. Well, as we know, experiencing homelessness is traumatic. And so I appreciate this question as a response to homelessness. We also need to continue to focus on preventative measures, which we talked a little bit before with tenant protections. I also piloted a program in Kirkland for legal aid when I was on the Human Services Commission. That is now a fully operating program. So we need to continue to invest in preventative measures in addition to measures to keep folks housed. The short answer is yes, I do support additional investments in this. As discussed earlier, our affordable housing needs in Kirkland are really at that 0 to 30% AMI, and a large proportion of that needs to be permanent supportive housing. That's going to be a challenging conversation in our community, and we need to have that conversation. We need to be very open and honest about what that need is and how we're going to partner. And so I fully support investments in additional permanent supportive housing. We need to plan for and accommodate, but we also need to actually partner with organizations that provide permanent supportive housing, and like Toby said, buy some land, work with faith communities on with their land as well. So thank you.
Kelly.
Thank you. So I just pulled the numbers, as Councilmember Falcone had just said. that we need over 2,500 units of permanent supported housing. That's 0 to 30% AMI. We can't do that without making more investments in supportive housing. So other resources are important. We all know that so many people are just one paycheck away from being homeless. Recently, Kirkland has made a lot of investments in our homeless outreach. We have hired a homeless outreach coordinator. We have a homeless outreach team. We have people that are helping people get off the street into safe, supportive housing with the wraparound care that they require. I also agree with Councilmember Nixon. We are purchasing property where we see it's an opportunity. The Houghton Village was a good price. The square foot data was way lower than any other property on the city of Kirkland. We will continue to make those investments.
Katie.
So I'm in agreement that we need to be partnering with some nonprofits to be more successful with solving our homeless problem. I do know that King County has already spent an enormous amount of money without measurable success. I think part of what I really focus on, especially in my work, is root cause analysis and really identifying where the problem's stemming from, because first you stop the bleeding. I think that's something that we're not doing. Right now, we're putting Band-Aids on problems, and I think we really need to focus on the root cause of what's happening and where it's coming from. And I think there's different shades of what's happening, because I think that there's different segments of the population, and there's variables for why they're homeless. Oh, that flag is so distracting. Oh man, I just lost my last.
There's a follow-up, so you'll have a chance to get back to it. So homelessness is a topic that elicits a range of opinions and emotions. How are you going to navigate strongly opposed opinions from residents or stakeholders? Again, you'll have 60 seconds, and this time we'll start with Amy.
Thank you. Well, if you've been tracking any of the conversations at Kirkland City Council over the past few years, you know that we deal with this all the time already. We have a lot of residents who are really engaged, which, some of you here tonight, which I really, really appreciate. And people have very strong opinions. And so this is something we have a lot of practice with. As a city council, we disagree as well and have very strong opinions, and we work together well. We compromise, we listen to each other, and we do so with respect. What I will do is I will listen to everybody's point of view with compassion. That's really, really important. And where possible, find common ground moving forward. That said, compromise is not always possible, nor is it always the best path forward. Sometimes bold decisions are needed in order to make the tough, right choice. And so we'll need to do that at times as well. But I really think it comes back to respect for people with different points of view and taking the time to really listen and learn and understand one another. Thank you.
Katie.
So I think the most important thing to do when you're facing opposing opinions is to really put your own hubris aside and listen to those that have a different opinion, because they may very well point out something you haven't thought of to prevent unintended consequences. That's why groups with opposing positions have the most successful outcomes. But I think one of the most important things for me to think about is, who do you represent as a council member? And that's the residents of Kirkland. And I would really side with how do the majority of the residents of Kirkland feel? And that's what they're electing me to do, is to really stand behind them and make decisions that they feel are in the best interest of them.
Kelly.
There are many issues that come before Kirkland City Council that are controversial and have strong opinions. I think one of the things, I do feel like it's important to listen, and the city works really hard to do robust engagement and reach out to all communities to hear their opinions. unfortunately, many times the people with access are the ones that you hear most from, and you have to work really hard to reach out into the communities to hear from everyone and to hear their needs. One of the things that Kirkland does really well is many things, in that when we build our permanent supportive housing and put our tenants in there, yes, there have been strong opinions, but we are going to prove to the community that we can do this well, and that we can do this in a supportive way, and that these residents are members of our community. And as we prove that we can do that, the next project won't be so hard. But I do think that, again, we need to hear from all voices and not just the loudest voices.
John.
Thank you. Councilmember Falcone has a good point about listening, and that's where I would start, is listening to different viewpoints with a sincere attitude of, not just listening to the people with the loudest voices, but everyone. The conversation about the La Quinta in our community has become unnecessarily divisive. Reason number one is because of a perceived or real lack of transparency by our city government in that decision making. And number two is because the La Quinta is isolated. It doesn't include our unhoused people within larger apartment communities. It's isolated, and one neighborhood, and specifically the people that live around it, are going to be outraged and angry about it. Whereas if you have an apartment building that includes people and has a 10% set aside or a set aside to include people in a larger apartment complex, there'll be less exclusion and therefore less concerns from the surrounding neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you all. Next, we are moving on to middle housing.
Do I get a chance to?
Oh, I am so sorry, Toby.
No problem.
I apologize. I've turned my page. Okay.
Thank you.
Go.
So I'm going to try to synthesize everything that's said here because we've heard a lot of great things. Number one, transparency is important. No surprises. Active outreach to get opinions from all stakeholders. Listen to everyone with civility and respect. Collect as much information as possible about the potential impacts of things that are being considered. We can't make decisions based on polls or on email counts because there are innumerable people in our city on every side of every issue. But what we have to do is synthesize all the input we received and weigh it against the principles that we council members told the voters that we adhered to, and then make decisions consistent with our principles. It's impossible to please everyone, but we should always strive to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. And now we'll move on to the next question, which is middle housing. And you'll have another 60 seconds for your responses. House Bill 1110 will soon require all Eastside jurisdictions to allow more units per lot in neighborhoods, including those that currently allow single-family only development. What solutions and/or processes would you support to increase middle housing production? We'll start with Kelly.
Thank you, and I'm so excited I get to go first. So as I mentioned, I formerly served on the Housing Strategy Advisory Group, which put forward Kirkland's Missing Middle Housing Code, which we passed in 2022, or 2020 during COVID. And it was one of the first cities in the region to do so. We are seeing production of missing middle housing. Last year, we did 137 units compared to 124 units compared to 37 the year prior. So we are seeing action on that. A couple things we're doing is Kirkland recently pre-approved ADU plans. So if you buy this plan, you'll have expedited permitting and you can build faster. We just recently sponsored a bill in the session that if you rent your detached ADU to low income under 60% AMI, you will get a tax exemption. We are constantly looking for new ways to create production. And I hate that I'm running out of time because I could talk for another 3 minutes.
Katie.
So I think one thing we really need to think about as we're creating the middle housing is our environment at the same time. Currently, Kirkland is part of the Heat Island, and I would suggest that we we build on already paved areas and create townhouses and condos in those areas and keep more space for our environment, for rain absorption, and also for the land to absorb the heat. And because there's already proven negative health outcomes with heat islands. And if we continue at the pace we're at without being thoughtful about how we're building and bring in green builders, then we are going to increase negative health outcomes in our area. And I think we can do middle affordable housing without doing that.
Toby.
Thank you. So the biggest challenge for housing affordability is excessive government regulation. We just make it too hard to build a variety of different housing types. And our middle housing ordinance was a great step in the right direction toward that regulatory relief to allow a variety of different housing types and not very strict codes. But more is needed. Currently, I think a significant problem is that if you're going to create a duplex or a triplex, it has to be a condominium. And creating a condominium ownership model, and that very much complicates the financing for these. And I think that's been a major hindrance to getting more duplexes and triplexes built. And we need to continue to streamline the permitting process, as was previously mentioned. And I think we need to work with the legislature to override subdivision covenants that require all buildings to be only single-family homes and exclude duplexes, triplexes, and ADUs.
John.
Councilmember Curtis has a good point. The single biggest success we've had recently in Kirkland is ADUs. We need to get these online. We need pre-approved plans. We need some preferred contractors. We need to get the permit guys issuing the permit, same week. We need to put these up like they're garden sheds and be aggressive about it and remove the bureaucracy from it. It needs to cost $100,000, $150,000, not $300,000 to $500,000. And if we can get these units in backyards, we can solve affordability crises now, and they're particularly well positioned for seniors to age in place. We've had a large uptick in ADUs, and it's been a real success in our city, driven at the beginning of the initiative by the Planning Commission and by city staff. And that's something that's coming online now and succeeding. Thank you.
Amy.
Wow, you were very precise. Well, Kirkland has actually had missing middle housing policy on the books since 2003. And then with Kirkland Zoning Code 113, and we, as was mentioned, significantly revised this policy in March of 2020, which, as you may remember, was when Kirkland was the U.S. epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's just how important this missing middle housing policy was to your council. We've done things such as developed a housing dashboard, have pre-approved ADU plans, but this is something we still need to tackle and work on, which we are working on with our comp plan updates. I agree that we need to work on the permitting and process as well. Toby mentioned, how the lots are split or not split, and that process. It actually, we do have an allowance for that, but it's pretty complicated and can take 6 to 12 months for that to happen and can cost time and money. And so we need to look at ways to streamline this process so that we can see more of the missing middle housing being built. So, and I'm looking forward to having that conversation with our comp plan updates too. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. Right in the button. As you can see from the slide, our next questions are about closing the racial home ownership gap. In Washington, there's a glaring racial home ownership gap, with just 49% of BIPOC households owning their homes, as opposed to 68% of white households. In Kirkland, the gap is even more striking, where 64% of white households are homeowners, while 40% of the Hispanic, Latinx, and 23% of Black African Americans own their homes. This striking disparity, outlined in a recent state report, emphasizes the pressing need for action to promote equitable home ownership. What are some considerations and strategies you'd bring in your role as a city council member to approach closing the racial home ownership gap? John.
Thank you. Well, racial justice is an extremely important issue, and getting a starter home is, I think, where we start with this subject. I rented until I was 39 years old when I bought my first house, so I know how difficult it is to get that first home. By addressing missing middle housing and addressing other issues to get that price point down, we make it easier for people, everyone, to get a starter home and get in the market. And once they have a starter home, hopefully the idea is that they create wealth, equity increases, mortgage goes down, and then they have a starting platform to get the second house or the third house or the dream house that they've always wanted. But having an entry point of $2 million or $2.5 million doesn't just exclude members of some communities, it excludes almost everyone. And in order to drive down that price point for starter homes, we have to get more serious about missing middle housing, and we have to reduce permit waiting times, which is an enormous failure of the city of Kirkland that is constantly preventing our missing middle housing from coming in at a lower price point. I will address this in a serious fashion. Thank you.
Toby.
Thank you. Well, for decades, Washington's condominium construction liability law has been broken. And that is why you see most multifamily buildings, new construction, are rental apartments instead of ownership condominiums. We need to fix, I mean, it's going to take telling the lawyers who do condominium liability lawsuits to just sit down and let's move on so that we can have some condominiums built to give people that place to buy their first home, to build equity, and then be able to start to climb the ladder. In addition to that, and I think that should be priority number one, but in addition to that, we need to focus on education and job training, just improving the economic conditions of people in our minority communities. We need to attract more good paying jobs to Kirkland. I think the council's been doing a very good job of that. We're going to have a great Amazon satellite factory right in Totem Lake that's going to hire a lot of people. We need to continue working to make Kirkland more welcoming to business so that they're willing to come here, including paying the housing impact fees. But we need to be able to also help people get into that first home with more financing. I'm not sure how much of that can be done at the local level. A lot of it's done at the federal and state level now, but I would focus on helping people get that first home financed as well.
Amy.
Thank you. Well, these racial home ownership gaps are not by accident. These are remnants of redlining and systemic racism that still exist today. So we need to be, we can't just, it's not going to fix itself. We have to be proactive and we have to be intentional about how we address this. I am certainly not an expert in this, but I'm really thankful for folks who are working on this. I would like to see us collaborate with groups such as the Black Home Initiative with the Housing Development Consortium. I know they're not currently targeting the East Side with their work, but they do have a lot of resources that are very easily accessible online. So I think that's a great first step. We'll be looking at the existing resources and having our DEIB manager perhaps brief council on what some of those resources are so that we could look at some of those recommendations and what we can begin to discuss potentially implementing in the city of Kirkland. I know, I've been very vocal that I would like us to have a specific home ownership down payment program. I know that's something that there is some state law that makes that a little bit of a challenge that we would need to advocate for changing for. But this, again, is an issue that we need to partner with folks in our community who are leading the charge in this and be very proactive and intentional, again, because this is something that's just unacceptable. Thank you.
Katie, and then Kelly.
So I think it's important for the council to be working with the communities. I think most of you may not know, but I am not married to a white guy. And so I am aware of some of the racial biases that people are affected by. And I also know that that it's not my job to find the solution for others, but what is my job is to partner with those folks to find out what they need and how we can help and support them in finding the solutions for themselves. And I do think that, John also pointed out some, other things that I had spoken about earlier as well, like easing the permitting process, just lowering the cost of housing in general. And I would agree that the biggest challenge is getting into that first home. And I think it's important to partner with groups to assist them, but not to solve for them. So that's what I would do.
Thank you. As Councilmember Amy, sorry, old habits, has already said, so many of us in this room and watching this stream have benefited from generational wealth. And if you haven't read The Color of Law, read The Color of Law. So it's really important that we address this and that we make changes in our society. As Toby said, there's much of this is difficult for us to do at the local level. This is a statewide issue. I was particularly excited, and we did support Rep. Taylor's bill, the homeownership covenant, which added a $100 fee on titles that will go to a fund to fund Black home ownership. We need to look for more opportunities for that. And as already been said in this room, is the city's door is open. We are looking for partnerships. We will continue to look for opportunities that we can fix the inequities in our city.
Thank you. I have just been handed the questions from our online audience and audience in the room. And there will be 3 rounds of questions with 60 seconds allotted for each answer. So question 1, regional relationships are absolutely critical to addressing the housing crisis. What do you bring to the table in terms of an ability to get things done with our regional partners? Let's start with Amy.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the Sound Cities Association caucus chair of the King County Affordable Housing Committee. So I'm doing a lot of this regional work already. And what that means is essentially it represents all the cities that are not Seattle and King County so that us smaller cities have a voice. And all that work that we do is regional. The housing need numbers that were displayed earlier tonight were something that I led on that committee. It was a challenge, as you can imagine, with some of the wealthier East Side cities who perhaps don't want to take on those huge needs. We really had an equity lens with that formula to take a look at where low wage jobs were and having the housing needs. That's why you're seeing so much on the east side of the 0 to 30% AMI in that area, because as we know, we have very expensive homes, and we also have a lot of low wage jobs of folks who can't afford to live here. So anyway, I got into the weeds a little bit on that, but as you can see from my list of endorsements, I have a lot of great relationships collaborating with folks throughout the region. Thank you.
Kelly.
Thank you. So many of us that serve on the council have many regional appointments. Amy, still want to say Councilmember Falcone, serves on the Affordable Housing Committee, which reports to the Growth Management Planning Council, which I am the SCA caucus chair for that. So when the AHC came forward with their housing recommendations, my committee also had issues with it's too hard. It's too hard. We can't do it. It's too hard. So what we did is we brought both caucuses together, the Affordable Housing Caucus and the Growth Management Planning Caucus, and we had lunch. And we sat in a room for 2 hours and we talked about it. And eventually my caucus members left the room smiling and voted in favor of Affordable Housing Committee's recommendations. And that's what's important. Partnerships, collaboration, listening to each other, and working together to solve problems.
Katie.
So I'm pretty familiar with working with different groups to achieve outcomes, and but I also know you always have to have your your priorities that are going to be important, and I think the council really needs to be focused on Kirkland's priorities. I think that one thing that I keep hearing again and again is that our current council just isn't representing Kirkland right now, and they cite other councils in other areas in King County where they feel like their constituency is better represented. I think as I said before, I think it's really important to think about, what's the 80-20 rule, and does this really benefit 80% of Kirkland and the residents of Kirkland? And so I would collaborate, but I would also keep in mind what's, the view of the Kirkland residents.
Toby.
Thank you. So I'll pile on with the concept of networking, and I think that's the key thing that our council is engaged in across the region, across the state. Personally, I've served on the Association of Washington Cities Legislative Priorities Committee, on the Sound Cities Association Public Issues Committee, many other regional committees and task forces. You can look at my website, tobynixon.com/abouttoby, to see the full list. But the key thing is, by knowing a lot of people who are involved in local and state government, you can pick up the phone, you can send an email, you can ask them about what are they doing in their city, what are the best practices, both in Washington and around the nation. And then we can collaborate with all of those local partners to try to convince the legislature to do the right thing for what local government needs. And I think our city is one of the best in the state at doing exactly that.
And John.
Thank you. As the chair of the Planning Commission and as somebody who's worked on the Planning Commission for our last 6 years, I can tell you that the biggest struggle that the city has had is constantly referring to government agencies and government bureaucracies and committees and caucuses and every other government agency as a partner and not referring to developers as partners. And by failing to do that, we have failed to include developers really in most of the planning of the station area plan. And it's very easy to view developers as the evil giant, but unfortunately nothing gets built without them. And by having continual meeting after government meeting on housing, we have to include developers. And I've seen firsthand on the Planning Commission that we haven't done a good job of that. We need to bring them into the meetings, into the fold, not demonize them, and partner with them to get this station area plan built within the next 10 years, not the next 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, Kirkland is rightfully proud of its groundbreaking 2020 middle housing legislation. However, as far as I can tell from the city's housing dashboard, just one duplex, triplex has been permitted since the legislation was passed. The number of ADUs has not grown significantly, though apparently there is a rise in cottage developments. Single-family housing still reigns. That said, what do you see as the 3 main barriers to increasing middle housing stock, and how would you remove those barriers? 60 seconds, beginning with Katie.
So permitting probably is the first thing that comes to mind. So that uncertainty prevents developers from wanting to come and build in Kirkland. I've spoken with a few developers who have talked about Kirkland and how challenging it is. And then also, I would say that, oh God, I had it a second ago. The 3 So permitting, and oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Permitting, can you ask the question one more time? Just the last.
The last one, sure. What do you see as the 3 main barriers to increasing middle housing stock, and how would you remove the barriers?
Okay. So permitting and also working with developers, and I ran out of time, so.
Kelly.
Thank you. So whoever wrote this question, thank you for looking at the housing dashboard because I'm quite proud of it. And if you spend some time on it, you can not only see what units are being built, but where they're being built. And so it's a really true picture of what's happening in the city. Single family reigns, you're absolutely right. So the three barriers I see are permitting. We are hiring 6 new planning staff to help with permitting. Permitting is taking too long. Design review. We do, you know that there's been some bills in the legislature to talk about abolishing design review. Frequently, design review not only adds additional costs, but it requires concessions that maybe will may just make it too expensive to be built. And the third one would be parking. We do know that parking is expensive. We are focused on transit-oriented development. Missing middle housing is a solution for that in the transit walk sheds, and so reduction of parking.
John.
Thank you. Permit waiting times are currently the biggest barrier we have, and we have had for years no real improvements in this in our city. There's a lot of things that are outside our city government that can be improved, but rather than listing those and talking about them, because our city government doesn't have a lot of control over them, our city government controls permit waiting times. We control how many planners we have. We control the speed at which they work. Permit waiting times, and within permit waiting times are a lot of other things that are some top 3 things are geological surveys and a lot of other surveys that are well-intentioned, but require the permit waiting time to be years. The carrying costs on those lots and those housing is sometimes $10,000 a month. So we have to address permit waiting times, but within permit waiting times, we have to eliminate a bunch of unnecessary bureaucracy and unnecessary studies that are happening that are increasing this permit waiting time. Thank you.
Toby.
Thank you. So this is very similar to the 5th question that we had earlier. And so I'll just restate the 3 points I had from in that 3 points I made in response to that question, which is that we need to figure out how to be able to build duplexes and triplexes without creating a condominium. And even the process we have today for dividing lots is, as Amy said, very time consuming, and that needs to be fixed. We need to streamline the permitting. As Kelly said, we're hiring more staff for that. And as John said, there's many more ways that we could streamline the permitting processes. But the one I want to focus on, well, I'm running out of time, is that the overriding of single family subdivision covenants that prohibit the building of duplexes and triplexes. We need to convince the legislature to do that over the objections of the Community Associations Institute and others who are dead set against it.
Amy.
Thank you. Well, going last, I'm going to repeat some of what's already been said. I had as my 3 main barriers, 3 Ps: permitting, process, and parking. Although I really like what Toby said about HOA covenants too. So I was on the fly trying to think of a way to start that with a P, but I can't think of it. So sorry, but I'm going to add that as a 4th one. Permitting, as Kelly mentioned, we're working on hiring staff. We acknowledge and understand that that's an issue that we're working on. Process, design review was mentioned, lot splitting. We need to come up with ways that we can make the process go quicker and be less burdensome for folks, and parking minimums. We need to look at that. Parking is really expensive, and if we're really smart about how we do that and how and where we allow increased density, looking at parking minimums is really going to help us get more housing and get more affordable housing. Thank you. Wow, and I'm under time.
Yes, thank you all. And our final question from the audience. The school district best serves all students when all schools have students of diverse income levels. However, if lower cost housing is clustered together heavily, then schools in these areas have a heavier lift to ensure all of their students are well served. How will you ensure that lower cost housing types are both plentiful and dispersed evenly throughout the city? We'll start with Toby.
Thank you. Well, that is a tough question. And I don't know that it's one that we've thought about a whole lot yet in the city council. But just brewing on it here in the moment, I think that the best way to do that would be to, number one, ensure that areas throughout the city are zoned so that multifamily housing can be built. And the state legislature took a big step in that direction recently by requiring that within a certain distance of transit stops. But I think, as I mentioned previously, the biggest challenge is the cost of land. And I think that if we want to make sure that this housing type is distributed around the city, a key thing the city can do is look for those opportunities to buy the land where it can be built and make sure that we buy land that's distributed throughout the cities. Thank you.
John?
Thank you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. How will you ensure that lower cost housing types are both plentiful and dispersed evenly throughout the city?
So when we addressed the homelessness question, I talked about not isolating and siloing homeless people or people in poverty and having them included in apartment buildings throughout our city. And having an inclusive strategy for affordable housing is what we have to have. I've said this previously in this forum, and I'll say it again. Siloing people in a building where everybody is in extreme poverty, I think is not the goal. I think we need set-asides to disperse that population because my kids are in the Lake Washington School District, and I want them to attend school with a diverse population that has some diversity to it, because in the workplace, when they graduate, they're going to be in a workplace with everybody, not just kids that look like them in a $2 million house. And we don't want some elementary schools and some schools to look vastly different than others. Thank you.
Amy?
Thank you. Well, we need to think comprehensively about this. Yes, some of the things that have already been mentioned about our zoning and having affordable housing and density throughout our whole city. I think that's really important. But we also need to think about where we build amenities across our city. One, so that we have amenities for everyone of all socioeconomic levels to be able to enjoy, such as our parks, our tree canopy, our sidewalks, transit, et cetera. And also so that throughout our city, regardless of the type of housing that's within each neighborhood, that folks who can afford market rate housing will want to live in throughout the city. And so that we will have the same strong communities and amenities regardless of your income level. That we won't have, the other side of the tracks where they don't have good parks, where they don't have good tree canopy. The good news is, successfully advocated for an equity mapping tool that our city staff now has, where we can look at things such as this. We can look at our tree canopy, we can look at our parks, and we can look at where affordable housing is to make sure that we're being really equitable about where those amenities are. Thank you.
Kelly?
I was waiting for Ryan. Okay, thanks, everyone. There's so much to say about this, and this is a fantastic question. So whoever put it forward, I want to thank you. So we do have 10% inclusionary zoning throughout the city, but as Councilmember Nixon said, there are gaps, in particular HOAs, and I do think that there's going to be a bill coming forward in the legislative session. What I was just thinking about was we just recently were looking at the equity map for Kingsgate and Juanita, and there are very clear gaps of where there is low poverty. And as we were looking at this, this is exactly what I was thinking of, is how can we target those areas so that they have the amenities and the housing to make them more equitable with the rest of the city. So that is really important to me. And as also has been said, we need to look at multifamily housing and transit areas and business districts and so forth. So thank you.
And Katie?
So I feel like it's a fairly simple solution. You create a heat map based on your schools, and you create that heat map based on layers, elementary, middle, and high school. And then you identify the best places within the areas that you locate to disperse lower cost housing in areas. And then I do want to go back to the other one, which was the lower barriers to middle housing. I would also focus on condos and townhomes, and I actually would avoid cottage houses because I do not believe that cottage houses are affordable. Many people have complained about that. So, but yes, I think that that the lowering the dispersal of lower cost housing is a fairly simple solution.
Thank you each for your answers, and thank you to our audience for those wonderful questions. As we conclude tonight's forum, we're going to give each candidate 60 seconds for a closing statement. And we'll start with our position 6 candidate, Amy Falcone.
Well, thank you so much to Lynn, our moderator, our organizers, and our wonderful hosts here at Lake Washington Institute of Technology, to all of my fellow city council candidates here tonight, and for all of you that came to listen. Housing is one of the most pressing issues facing our community, and we need to remain focused on both short and long-term solutions. We need to think creatively and adopt innovative approaches. And we need leaders who have the experience, the vision, and the skills to successfully address the affordable housing crisis. Through my own lived experience of housing instability, my service on the Kirkland Human Services Commission and on the Eastside Human Services Forum Board, and as the SEA caucus chair of the King County Affordable Housing Committee, I have the experience, the passion, the compassion, the knowledge, and the relationships to collaboratively address the affordable housing crisis regionally and in our city. I've led on this long before I joined the city council, and I continue to be a leader within Kirkland and regionally on this issue. I ask for your vote, but more importantly, I ask for your continued engagement so we can work together to ensure all of our neighbors have a place to call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. For position 2, Katie Malik, and then Kelly Curtis.
Yeah, so I also, like Amy, would like to thank everyone for coming and also for being invited and for you guys for putting on this candidate forum. I really appreciate it. God, it's happening to me again. I think that housing is a complex, it's a complex issue that is not super easy to solve. And I think the most important thing to think about when coming to the council and when coming to the table with others is that you have to bring the key stakeholders. One area I think that Kirkland has not done well is bring developers to the table. As it's been pointed out, and I think that it's important to collaborate and to bring everyone to the table. And I think we can come up with solutions and also come up with creative solutions in order to create better and more affordable housing.
I want to thank everyone for the conversation tonight. And I think what we all are walking away from is we're facing tough issues, both locally and regionally: housing scarcity, climate change, structural inequities. We didn't know COVID was coming. We don't know what the next 4 years will bring. So we must pick city leaders that you trust to make good decisions and that will work well with others to get things done. The questions we need to ask ourselves is, do we want our children and grandchildren to be able to live where they grew up? Do we want to leave for our children and grandchildren a livable planet? Do we want a city where people are treated fairly and have opportunities? I hope I've shown tonight that I have a proven track record of working on these issues and dealing with complexity and making sure that this city is a safe place and a welcoming place for everybody to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. And for position 4, John Tim Chizen and Toby Nixon.
Me first? All right. Thank you. I've served as a planning commissioner for the last 6 years and as chair of the planning commission. And this housing issue has been the main focus of myself and the entire planning commission for years. The only serious way to address this issue is get the station area plan and the planned units online within the next 10 years and not the next 50 years. It's going to be hard in this regulatory environment and with rising interest rates and a business environment that is not very favorable to development. I will work with business interests and work with developers, and I will refer to developers as partners with the city. Right now, we have government, nobody building because nobody is building the housing that was projected within the station area plan. We don't have any developers doing it. We have a lot of government people talking about it. It's not going to happen unless we have people with experience and the drive to actually make the station area plan happen within the next decade. Thank you. Go to johnt.com. johnt4kirkland.com. I'd ask for your vote. Thank you.
Toby.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll conclude by saying I love serving on our city council. One of the things I love most about it is the diversity of perspectives that our council members bring to the table. We are not 7 bobbleheads sitting up on that dais agreeing on everything, but we work together with respect and civility to understand each other's positions. And I firmly believe that the fact that we are not an echo chamber where everybody thinks the same way means we get better results. And I'm sure that the way we work together, we will be able to continue to address the housing challenges before us. I would invite you to visit tobynixon.com to learn more about me and about my positions on the issues. And thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you so much to each of our candidates. We all appreciate your thoughtfulness and your thoroughness about this very critical issue of affordable housing. I'd like to ask for a round of applause, and then don't leave just yet because we have a few more announcements, but please, a round of applause for our candidates tonight. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for making this night possible. Eastside Housing Equity Coalition, which includes Eastside For All, the Indian American Community Services, the Muslim Community Network Association, and the Housing Development Consortium. Futurewise, the Eastside Affordable Housing Coalition, Habitat for Humanity, and Natural and Built Environments. And of course, a huge thank you to Lake Washington Institute of Technology for the space. And so as we close tonight, I'd like to take a moment to express our heartfelt appreciation to the city council candidates who have dedicated their time and effort to be here tonight. Your commitment to public service and your willingness to engage with the community is commendable, appreciated, and essential to our democratic process. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to the community members, each of you who showed up to join us in person or online. Your presence and active engagement in this forum show your dedication to the city's well-being and your commitment to being informed and involved citizens. The decisions made at the ballot box will shape Kirkland's future. We encourage all of you to continue researching, go to those websites, ask questions, and stay engaged with issues that matter most to you. Thank you once again to our candidates, to everyone here, and good evening.
We have a lot of extra food. We have containers.
There's nobody building. There's nobody building station. It's one developer.
Well, we missed our catalyst or whatever it is looking, so.